In 1977, Godzilla was nearing the end of his long original run of movies, though he was still a popular classic creature beloved of monster movie fans everywhere, and remained a successful merchandising moneymaker with toys, model kits, a Saturday morning cartoon and a Marvel comic either already on sale or on the horizon. Yet production company Toho managed to almost destroy their giant lizard's reputation in a moment of foolhardy licensing that resulted in a film that they would later describe as an abomination, and which now sits in infamy as one of the most outrageous, misguided celluloid follies of all time. This is the Overlooked Hotel, and this is the story of Luigi Cozzi's reinvention of Godzilla.
Come vedete sono Luigi Cozzi e stiamo lavorando qui su questo set preparando il film Godzilla. Godzilla che vedrete presto sugli schermi in una nuova versione.
Non si sa con che cosa abbiamo a che fare.
Una sola fiammata gigantesca ed accecante distrugge 8 navi.
Luigi Cozzi, for those unfamiliar with the name, is an Italian film director noted more for his enthusiasm than his talent. He's become something of a beloved figure amongst Italian genre fans, in large part for being the man behind Profondo Rosso, the Rome-based Dario Argento-themed store, where he's often on hand to greet international tourists. His career as a filmmaker, however, has been a decidedly spotty one. He made the entertainingly trashy space opera Star Crash, a much more fun knockoff of Star Wars, and Contamination, a lively knockoff of Alien. A pair of lackluster Hercules films in the early 1980s, the frankly absurd The Black Cat, posited as the conclusion of the Dario Argento Three Mothers trilogy long before Argento made his own ham-fisted Mother of Tears, and assorted other horror, giallo and exploitation films, and even a couple of documentaries about Argento. He is not, it must be said, in the top or even the second tier of Italian horror filmmakers, but he seems like a good-natured sort, and unlike many of his contemporaries, actually seems to genuinely love horror and fantasy cinema. By far, Cozzi's oddest and most absurdly pointless project was a 1977 overhaul of the original 1954 Godzilla, which was released on unsuspecting and presumably aghast Italian cinema goers in the wake of the 1976 King Kong remake. Giant monsters were expected to be all the rage, and Cozzi thought a re-release of the 1954 film would be a big hit. The fact that new Godzilla films were still being made at the time was neither here nor there. Cozzi's original plan was to re-release the British Godzilla imitator Gorgo, but the asking price from the rights holders was too high. Ironically, given their modern reputation for being money hungry, Toho in Japan was much more reasonable, and even agreed to Cozzi reworking the film once it became clear that cinemas were not very interested in showing an old black and white movie. This wasn't the first time that the film had been adapted for foreign audiences, of course. The 1954 Gojira became the 1956 Godzilla King of the Monsters for its US release, with new scenes featuring Raymond Burr and directed by Terry Morse spliced in, quite impressively, to make the movie much more comfortable for xenophobic American and other Western viewers, a practice that was still pretty commonplace with Japanese films during the 1950s and 60s. It was, in fact, this print that Toho supplied to Cozzi, and presumably they thought that he might come up with something new and exciting. The deal included the proviso that Toho would take ownership of the new negative after the Italian release, seemingly with the hope of further international revivals of this modernised edition. Cozzi faced two immediate problems: colorizing the movie and bringing it up to modern running time requirements. The US cut was 80 minutes long, but Italian distributors insisted on at least a 90-minute running time. This latter problem was solved with shameless pilfering from other movies. Scenes from The Day the Earth Caught Fire, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and the original movie's first sequel, Godzilla Raids Again / Gigantus the Fire Monster, were spliced in to pad things out and change the narrative structure. And to give the film a more contemporary, violent feel, the movie opens with documentary footage of Hiroshima victims and destruction. Godzilla was, of course, originally inspired by Japan's experience of being bombed with nuclear weapons, so this made a certain sense, even if such real-life horror is a rather jolting start to a monster movie. How much permission Cozzi had to use the scenes from other films remains a matter of debate, but Italian copyright laws in the 1970s were notoriously lax. Colorization as we know it now did not exist in 1977. There was no computerized system or AI that would colorize movies frame by frame. Given how hit and miss that method remains to this day, you can only imagine what an attempt to colorize Godzilla might have been like. It clearly needed an inspired mind to tackle the job, and it found one. Inspired, but not actually good, we should note. The colorization job was given to Armando Valcuada, and he spent 3 months creating a frame-by-frame gel wash of various colours that is somewhere between traditional tinting and psychedelic liquid lights, with a handful of hues floating around the screen. The result is interesting. It's a bit like a bad trip and might well cause headaches. How this ever passed muster as colour for those picky theatres is anyone's guess. Presumably the film was booked in and showing before anybody realised that they'd been scammed. Just as Al Adamson passed off the tinted stock footage in Horror of the Blood Monsters as some technical leap forward by calling it Spectrum X, so Cozzi hyped this new neon nightmare as being in Spectrorama 70, which probably sounded very impressive in advertising. But Cozzi wasn't just playing with the visuals. Sensurround was the big gimmick of the 1970s, an attempt to bring action films like Earthquake and Roller Coaster to life by shaking the cinema with low-frequency bass sounds that people would feel more than hear. Perfect for making explosions feel all the more realistic. The format was doomed for the same reason that many gimmicks fail. It involved the installation of special equipment, and most theatres did not see that as value for money. Cozzi, of course, could not afford to license Sensurround, or even knock off versions like Megasound or Sound 360, and so invented his own version called Futursound. After all that was really needed was a lot of bass. There are no records of how successful this system was, but I can only imagine watching this day-glow atrocity while being pummeled with low-frequency bass might have resulted in most audience members feeling very, very ill. Cozzi used the original film score for most of the new version, but for the opening scenes added a synth rock score by Magnetic System, a band consisting of Vince Tempera, Franco Bixio and Fabio Frizzi. You might find the score oddly familiar. Frizzi would later rework it in his iconic soundtracks for Lucio Fulci's Zombie Flesh Eaters and City of the Living Dead. The Godzilla theme is not quite as good as these classic later versions, but it's probably the only part of this debacle that has any real value. The theme was released as a single on Cinevox, and an original copy will now cost you an arm and a leg. The only other worthwhile thing to come out of all this was the impressive film poster, an image so striking that it would, a couple of years later, appear on the front cover of the first issue of legendary American horror magazine Fangoria. Toho in the 1970s was clearly not as protective of its properties as it is now, but even so, Cozzi's reconstruction of their movie did not go down well. While the contract allowed Cozzi to essentially do what the hell he liked and release it without having to get prior approval, the company made damn sure that it was never seen anywhere else. You're not even allowed to mention the film in any Toho-approved product. References to it were removed from the Blu-ray commentary for the Criterion release of the original 1954 version. Copies have somehow survived online, however. Poor quality prints that make the viewing experience even more of a challenge than it already was. And the Cozzi cut is now the stuff of legend, an ambitious but woefully misguided attempt to update a film that had already been compromised and really didn't need this sort of mugging. So I'm curious to know what you think of Cozilla as it is widely known. Is it an abomination, or am I selling it short? Let us know in the comments. And make sure to like, share and subscribe if you never want to miss another overlooked hotel deep dive into obscure history. I appreciate all of you who've already done so. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.